David Katz is on the road a lot.
Yeah.
But he always is here on Thursdays. He honors his obligation to this show. Please welcome David Katz, everybody.
Great to be with you, Mark. Kim.
Hi.
David,
Hi.
they have this new recording, which I was mentioning at the top of the show. Supposedly, it's a recording of Trump. Now, this is a recording made in the interview process for Mark Meadows' book. Okay. So that's the reason they were recording things. And it is Donald Trump talking about the fact, and he was in the time in kind of a feud with Milley, that Mark Milley had plans to invade Iran. I mean, he had drawn them up, and I've got them right here. He waved the document. Apparently, you can even hear the document crinkling. For a moment, I'm going to put aside what I said in the first hour, which is that I don't necessarily even believe that that's what was in the document. I mean, Trump has got a history, as you know, of not always being truthful. But if that were the case, and even considering that it may not be germane, it would suggest that he knows he's not supposed to have that. He referred to it as a classified document. Can you give me the legal ramifications of this?
Well, your first comment is so interesting because in American history, of course, we have McCarthyism. And people remember about Joseph McCarthy from history that he said, I have here in my hands the name of 55 subversives employed by the State Department. And he might have just had, his lunch list on it. So you're absolutely right, Mark, that who knows what Trump really had in his hand. But it makes a lot of sense, and it's, again, very damning for Trump. People will recall that there's the Access Hollywood tape that in any kind of normal circumstances would have been the end of his presidential campaign and his hopes. We also have the call into Georgia in very early January of 2021, where he tells the Secretary of State down in Georgia, hey, just find me 11,000 votes, meaning just concoct them. So Trump is famous for these self-inflicted wounds, but he has a base that seems to forgive him for everything, including worry to shoot someone on Fifth Avenue or to confess on tape that he shot somebody on Fifth Avenue. Having said all of that, this is very devastating because this tape, this time around, is in the hands of a special prosecutor who I think is very fair-minded. I always thought Mueller's inclination was not to indict Trump when it all came out. I think that was one reason why Mueller was selected, a Republican, selected by Republicans. But I think Jack Smith is right down the middle. And let's face it, most special prosecutors, especially when they have a lot of meat on the table, indict somebody. And, his aim is to see whether Trump did something illegal criminally under federal law. And I think that I'm quite optimistic that this will result in an indictment. Whether for the insurrection or not, Mark, we don't know. But I think for Mar-a-Lago, for the illegal retention of those documents, and certainly for the illegal handling of those documents. And I think that this tape is devastating to Trump because it shows that he knows that they haven't been declassified. He's talking in July 2021. He hasn't been president for 6 months. So even if you assume that what I think is the fiction, that he declassified them all on the way out the door, he did not declassify these, because had he declassified these, what he'd be saying on the tape at the meeting in July 2021 is, take a look, folks. Take a look at this. These are declassified. You can look at them. They're not Espionage Act covered anymore. These are all ones I declassified. And look at what a jerk this guy Milley is. But he didn't take that attitude. He took the attitude that he could not show them to anybody, that they were secret, that they were classified, that they were covered by the Espionage Act. And so he's making comments about them, but he's not showing them to people.
So in that spirit, then I would ask you for a bit of a prediction, but this might be a broader prediction. David has very good predictions. The track record, I think, is unblemished. And unblemished is a ding word, by the way. The prediction relates to this, what I think is slow walking of these charges. Can you give me some sense of the timing of these various legal problems that Trump has in the form of coming indictments? Like you said, I think there will be an indictment on this. What would be the timetable on that?
I think this Mar-a-Lago indictment is going to come down this year. I know I'm sticking my neck out, and that the good thing about an unblemished record, you can never be so worried about your unblemished record that you start hedging, right? But I do think that he'll be indicted this year. I think this is particularly significant because there's not only probably this tape, but other tapes like it. And just, for your audience, here's what I think happened. I'm speculating a bit, okay? But I think that these tapes were either obtained in one of the searches, and, we all know about the Mar-a-Lago search, but there may have been searches of this golf club in New Jersey. There may have been searches of other Trump properties, and he didn't want to ballyhoo those. And remember, the only reason we know about Mar-a-Lago is that while the search was just ending, that's when Trump went in the media. This idea of leaks, the FBI leaks, the Department of Justice leaks, they did not leak even that Mar-a-Lago search. That was Trump saying, you won't believe what they did. They were in my bedroom. They were in Melania's drawers, blah, blah, blah. Look what the feds do. They're
David Katz with the Trump
terrible,
impression, by the way, very strong. Yeah.
They singled me out. I know. It was a great loss to comedy that I went into criminal defense, Mark. I'm sure you'll agree.
It's a fallback. It's nice to have a fallback. Yeah.
Great loss. Yeah. I'm not quitting my day job. Don't worry.
Yeah.
But I think that what I understand happened here was they either get it from these searches, and there may have been searches now of more than Mar-a-Lago, also scary for Trump. And it may have been that they got them by subpoenaing people, because this information was disseminated to people who had no security clearance. These were people who were running around like the ghostwriters who were writing, what's his name, Meadows' book, which they have to put humiliatingly only sold 20,000 copies. I mean, you're the White House chief of staff and you sell 20,000 copies. I mean, I think Melania's hairdresser sold more than 20,000 copies, right? So they're putting together this book that's going nowhere, but they obviously want to sort of, make nice with Meadows, convince Meadows, oh, he's a big deal, inflate his ego. Trump has brought these ghostwriters. These ghostwriters have no security clearance at all. So, of course, they are saying that there was a tape running. There's somebody else, some lady whose name just came out, and she's running a tape all the time so that when these pearls of wisdom to put into Meadows' book are rolling out, nobody forgets these pearls of wisdom. They have it on tape. And, of course, Trump takes over the conversation and starts to say all of these things. So what I think happened at that point was they put people in the grand jury, Mark. And in the grand jury, it's very, very secret. When I worked with Adam Schiff, we were two of the rare people who've been inside a federal grand jury. A lot of people who have other great criminal experience, like been criminal defense lawyers, been public defenders, worked in the administration, but not walking in and out of grand juries, haven't had that experience inside the very secret grand jury. It's a crime if you disclose what happened in the grand jury, but it's not a crime for the witness. So what normally happens in these situations is it's not the prosecutor who leaks it. It's not a grand juror or an FBI agent who might be in there testifying, but you call civilian witnesses in there. So the civilian witness says, yes, I was writing that book. I really don't recall a lot about it. I'm a ghostwriter. I'm doing a lot of things. Well, did the president, ex-president say this and that? And the other thing, well, I don't really recall. Well, Mr. Witness, let me play this tape in front of the grand jury to refresh your recollection. And they play the tape. Now the witness says, oh, yes, I remember this, I remember that, I don't remember the third thing. And guess what? When the witness walks out, the witness says to the lawyer, who's not allowed to be in the grand jury room along with the witness, hey, they asked me about this, they asked me about that, they really gave me heat on this other stuff, they played the tape, I don't remember a lot of it, I do remember enough a lot of it, am I in trouble on account of this? And now two people know about it, right? That witness and the lawyer. And I suspect that that's where the leak came from. I suspect that CNN doesn't have the tape to actually play because, again, it was heard in that matter. It was played, but it couldn't be recorded because the person is a witness in front of the grand jury or they're the lawyer, and so they're in no position to tape what was played to the witness in the grand jury. You with me?
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Then that's a little walk through the steps that will lead up to this indictment. It's interesting, too, Donald Trump's efforts to point to the election as, stolen, et cetera, extended to many people and through many means, right? Meaning Had Giuliani, you had the pillow guy, you had you had legal challenges, you had Sidney Powell, you had all these others. The band of crazies was extensive. Then of course you had the violent attempted overthrow, etc. Along the way, there was this guy Christopher Krebs. Now Christopher Krebs was the guy who was the cybersecurity official in the U.S. government, okay, that was looking at the other allegation, which was somehow that the election wasn't secure. And he was charged with, and his agency was charged with, and those under him, looking at the election and making sure that the 2020 election was cool, was okay, was secure. So he came back with the conclusion that it was secure, that it was legitimate, and that there were no problems with the 2020 election. What happened with Christopher Krebs was he was fired a short time later. And it's thought that that firing was related to, not getting the conclusion that you wanted type thing. Now there have been subpoenas issued to people in the presidential personnel office because they are looking into the firing of Krebs and the timeline of events leading up to the January 6th Capitol attack. This is connected to the Jack Smith J6 indictments, which I would imagine might be the last thing on the Katz timeline that will be forwarded. Your comments.
Well, your audience will never forget this guy Krebs' name if you watch Dobie Gillis, because I think the beatnik on that old TV show was named Maynard G. Krebs. So you'll remember Krebs, and Krebs may turn out to be a major figure in all of this. Krebs was a loyal Republican. He was picked by Trump. But when he was put in charge of this cybersecurity thing, and everybody was saying, Hugo Chavez from the grave somehow controlled these machines, and they didn't add it up right, and there were all of these boxes that were found, and the computers were fooled around with, Krebs turned around and said, no, I've examined all of that. My experts in government have examined that. It's all nonsense. There's no malfunctioning of machines. There's nothing wrong with the count. And of course, he was in charge of the cybersecurity office. And if you look at the things like Dominion and some of the other claims, they really come down to a false claim that there was something wrong with the cyber. There was something wrong with the count or the electronics of the count. Here was the person in charge of the government effort to make sure there was nothing wrong with the count. He worked for Trump. He was a political appointee. And he said there's nothing that was monkeyed with. There was nothing that was wrong with any of the electronics, the cyber, anything. That particularly infuriated Trump. Trump fired him 5 or 6 days later after he issued that report. This is in that critical period, Mark, when we're between the vote and when the transition ought to have started and Trump ought to have acknowledged defeat. But this is these frantic efforts to somehow stay in power that Trump is engaged in. After he fires that fellow Krebs, he says, it was a highly inaccurate report. Of course, there's no evidence that there was anything inaccurate about the report. And then come the really gross efforts to tamper with the election, to change the person in charge at the Department of Justice and to put Clark in charge there and fire the people who are in charge of the Department of Justice toward the end. And there's the call that I mentioned before into Georgia, where Trump personally gets on the phone and says, find me 11,000 votes, even though by that time the vote has been counted and recounted and certified. And then there were also the efforts to get alternate slates. So for Jack Smith, this shows that he's not just looking at Mar-a-Lago. He's showing that Trump knew that he'd lost the election, that it was clear that there was no evidence on which he could base any of these fanciful claims that he somehow had been cheated or that there was a big steal or anything like that. And then when you add the insurrection on top of it and all of the incendiary speeches that Trump made and the things that he did, that's the case that Trump committed a crime knowing that he'd lost, pretending that he'd won, and riling people up to have that huge riot and insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. So it looks like both of these cases are going to get indicted, but I'm not sure they're going to be indicted together. They may not be in one long indictment. Jack Smith may start off with the Mar-a-Lago because it seems so clear and so devastating for Trump. And it would be less controversial. You'd have all these arguments. Well, didn't Biden do it? Well, no, Biden didn't do it because Biden didn't obstruct justice. He didn't do anything like resisting a subpoena, like moving documents, knowing that they were going to search in place A, try to hide them in place B. I mean, that's just raw criminal conduct. That's the kind of thing that you see in criminal cases where the person is just stupid, right? Just stupid. And they think, oh, well, they won't think to look in the bathroom, so I'll put him in the bedroom. And he tells somebody, move it from the bathroom to the bedroom. I think they'll only search the bathroom. And you just look at it and say, my God, this guy is so guilty of the crime. And he's so guilty, he has such knowledge of criminality, because look at this thing that he did to obstruct justice. This is a pure, classic, just raw obstruction of justice case at this point. And when you add the tape and you add the proof of Trump's criminal knowledge, I do think that this year we will see, later this year, we'll see an indictment of Trump, not one of his subordinates, of Trump, for the Mar-a-Lago retention of documents, the showing of documents. And I believe that'll be not just under the classified documents laws, but under the Espionage Act.
Yeah, espionage is one of those words that seems particularly radioactive. The obstruction of justice seems so clear. Even you just, sort of recapitulated the events and what he did. And recapitulated is a ding word, yeah. But I wonder, you mentioned all of these things, and you mentioned the Espionage Act, but you didn't mention obstruction. Was that implied maybe at the beginning of what you were saying?
Yes, that this would be, there may be an argument that he could have taken some of those documents with him. I don't really see it, but he does have certain power to declassify things. And you remember when Trump wanted to put out his side of the story, suddenly he declassified things and say, well, you see how this supports me? And people are like, wait a second, I thought this was the nuclear capacity of Iran. I thought that was classified. How did something become declassified at 9 a.m. and Trump is giving a speech about it? We have to be really tough on Iran because they have growing nuclear capacity. You think, oh my God, isn't that top secret? Apparently the president does have power like that. He ought to be reined in, of course, and not disclose stuff like that. But just, Mark, it's important for people to understand this Iran thing. There was a huge controversy. Trump's no longer the president. He's out at his resort, his golf resort, not in Florida, but in New Jersey. He's got this group of people around, and they're reporting that Trump was really planning an October, November surprise. He was going to invade Iran or have some bellicose action toward Iran. And people were going to say, oh, my God, the country is at war. Salute the flag, vote for the incumbent, and Trump would keep power. And that was what was being reported at the time. Presumably, Trump is saying something like, I was going to start an October surprise war with Iran. Look at this memo from Milley, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He had a whole plan to go into Iran militarily. Now, that's really frightening because to the extent there was any details about how we were going to go into Iran militarily, that's unbelievably provocative with not just Iran, but Iran's allies and the world to talk about such a thing. Can you imagine if the memo said Iran's plans to invade Israel or bomb Israel? I mean, we could be on the verge of World War III, just people talking about it. So this is not a big joke that Trump had these classified documents, that they were highly militarily secret. And whatever authority a president may have to declassify something, Mark, an ex-president 6 months out of office had absolutely no business retaining these documents, showing them to anybody, talking about them with anybody. And of course, it's of great value to Israel and other countries like Saudi Arabia, who are potentially people who would put a lot of money in Trump's pocket, that he would keep those documents. There is a link between apparently what Trump kept and what Trump thought he could monetize.
Okay, so bellicose is a ding word. I have my last question then, because now I just am trying to get the hierarchy of badness, okay? Is obstruction of justice a more intense charge and case to be brought? I mean, that is to say, more, from the standpoint of the results of an obstruction of justice, penalties might be the way to the word. Obstruction of justice worse than document sequestration and removal of federal documents. Which one is worse for Trump?
Well, the Espionage Act is the worst, that he's monetizing documents, that he's trying to sell them to somebody, regardless of the best interests of our national security, but just to put money in his pocket. I mean, if that's what Jack Smith ends up having, it's hard to believe that even his base would stand by him. That's like Benedict Arnold kind of stuff, right? That's helping the enemy of the United States just to line your pocket.
Right.
So I think
okay.
that's the worst one of all. The obstruction of
But
justice.
but David, if he wasn't selling the documents, he just had them because out of his own braggadocio or ego or whatever. Where does that? If you take the commercial aspect out of it, where does it leave it?
Well, let's assume it's just braggadocio and what people with no security clearance learn from that. And I'm making something up, okay? That our plan is to sink all the oil tankers in the Gulf of Hormuz. If the plan that Milley had was to knock out certain computer systems, that we actually have put our computer systems in there so we could disable all of Iran's computers instantly. Think of what an amazing breach of our national security is. If people without security clearance know that the plan is to hit the oil tankers, they know the plan is to knock out computer systems that Iran doesn't know are bugs that we put in their computer system. This is just absolutely awful stuff. The difficulty is talking about it. If you could talk about it and prove it, even the base would get it. Even they would say, you know what, this Trump, he went crazy for money. I like the guy, I like some of his ideas, but he went crazy with greed. Even they would see it that way, but it's very difficult, Mark, to talk about these issues, to even have an intelligent conversation because it's full of national security information. What was in that 4-page summary? Some military experts have pointed out it's probably not a detailed attack plan on Iran. That would be much bigger. But certainly there'd be an executive summary that might have something from Milley like that. And Milley can't talk about it. Nobody can talk about it because it's so highly classified. And I hope your audience thinks about it. Plans to attack other countries, obviously we have them, but our analysis of the vulnerabilities of other countries and therefore the analysis of what they would do back to us, what our vulnerabilities may be, these are the crown jewels of national security, and nobody from any party ought to be keeping them or talking about them publicly.
Wow, so well said. David Katz, great analysis today and also a prediction. So we will see. We'll join you next week. David, so appreciate your contributions always. Thank you. And
I'll be on by video. I'll be on by video next week. I just
you will. Today. I love it. All right,
everybody.
The great David Katz, everyone. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.